Hi guys, welcome back to Zo Talks. This is a show where we discuss all things mental health. We focus on adolescents, the mental health industry, and the education industry. This is also the show where we want to discuss all things difficult. What are some of the burning questions on your mind that you want us to talk about? I'm Christina, I'm from Zoala. We're a generative AI tech startup company. Unfortunately for today, we don't have Jo from wwyd because she's out sick. But today we have a very, very special guest, Dev from Mental A.C.T. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Dev. Please give us an intro about who you are, what you do.
Hi guys, I'm Devan, or you can call me for short Dave. A bit about myself, I'm actually a social worker practicing in a family service center in Singapore. Alongside that, I actually run a non-profit organization called Mental A.C.T. Not a drama company. Quite a number of people keep thinking that it's a drama company for mental health, but rather it's actually a non-profit organization that actually looks into the South Asian or commonly known as the Indian community in Singapore. So in this non-profit organization, we provide mental health programs and services, all right, that actually look at destigmatizing mental health within the community and at the same time creating spaces for people to take care of their mental health and seek any forms of counseling or program related help. Yeah. So that's in a nutshell, mental act. A bit more about myself. Well, apart from being a social worker, I'm also a suicide intervention first aider, meaning I actually provide support for those who are actually feeling suicidal. I do it through word of mouth at the same time through my organization as well, where I look at how we can actually provide support for those who are going through severe mental health distress that could be linked to suicidal ideations or even suicide attempts as well. Yeah.
So Dev does some amazing work, but you just touched upon a term that actually I
Mm-hmm.
first learned speaking with you the first time we met, and it's about
Yep.
that psychological and mental first aid. So I don't know
Yes, that's right.
about other people and our viewers, but
Mm-hmm.
that's the first time I've heard of it. It's very common that people know what first aid is. Some make the efforts an initiative to go and get their first aid course because you
Yep.
never know when you
Mm-hmm.
might need that. But
Mm-hmm.
psychological mental health first aid, can you explain a little bit more about what that is and how we can
Sure.
obtain these skills?
Okay. So when you look at psychological first aid and mental health first aid, right, it's two different first aid skills that actually look at helping someone in distress. Okay. But when we look at PFA, all right, psychological first aid for short, right, it's about providing support and care for anyone who's in distress at that point of time when the distress occurs. For example, all right, you are walking along the road and you see someone, all right, who's in distress because they got into an accident. They're sitting on a curb, all right, and they're going through certain trauma. For example, they're shaking in distress, or they look lost, they look numb, they're just staring out into the space. So in those kind of situations, psychological first aid comes in. You look at identifying the distress signs. Then after that, you look at, okay, can we provide any kind of support to hear them out, to get them to process a bit of the traumatic experience they might have gone through, and then signpost them to the necessary resources. For example, a counselor or any agencies that can provide them with a bit more intervention to process and kind of like debrief that traumatic event. Okay, so that's PFA. So if PFA is not administered on the person, so coming back to the same example, for example, the person has been sitting at the curb, nobody attended to her or him, they, and the person goes back home with that trauma and then tries to lead life on. But over 2 to 3 weeks later, all right, they start developing signs of anxiety. Whenever they walk along the road, any sudden movement on the road, they immediately get a panic attack. Or they feel anxious to cross the road because they don't know whether another car is coming. So this might be telltale signs where the person might have been actually slowly having or exhibiting mental health distress, or mental distress for short, meaning they might be actually slowly developing signs and symptoms of mental illnesses. All right. So during this particular portion, when they're developing it, is usually the 2 to 3 weeks mark, right? That's where if someone who is trained in mental health first aid comes to them, they can identify these signs and symptoms in relation to whatever that they are, exhibiting. And at the same time, they know how to speak to them, do an assessment, sometimes even checking in with them. Do they feel suicidal? Do they have any suicidal ideations? And then signpost them to the relevant people or relevant mental health professionals. All right. So if you were to look into a timeline, right, when any incident happens, PFA is the first line of defense. All right. And if PFA is not administered at the right time and the person, continues to experience, the after effects of the trauma, then mental health first aid comes into play. So in a nutshell, that is, the similarities and also the differences between PFA and mental health first aid.
Okay. So for someone that has identified they have some issues that they want to talk it with someone, so if they go
Mm-hmm.
to a counselor or a
Mm-hmm.
psychologist, would you say they're more psychological first aid or mental health first aid, or it's the next stage after that?
Brilliant question. So that will be the next stage. When a mental health professional comes in, right, it's no longer about providing the surface level kind of interventions, all right? But instead, we go deeper into processing the actual incident, finding out how has it impacted them in terms of their psychology, in terms of their, their mood, their behavior, their physical health, those kind of things. And the person provides specialized interventions, all right, that can actually be backed by theoretical models or any other kind of evidence-based support or interventions. So that in a way it's different because for PFA and MFA, right, if you are administering it, you have very basic skills of counseling. Okay, very basic listening skills, paraphrasing skills, empathizing skills. But when you go to a mental health professional, that person has actually know the theories that can actually back what you are experiencing and how we can provide a specific intervention that can address it directly or indirectly. So it's more of like a advanced stage of counseling, and they will be the best people to provide that.
Yes, yes, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's as you were explaining that, another going back to the analogy of physical first aid or medical first
Mm-hmm.
aid, I'm thinking,
Yeah.
our first aid is stuff like band-aid, tourniquet,
Mm-hmm.
CPR.
Mm-hmm.
So just the things to
Mm-hmm.
keep them alive at the,
Correct.
first and foremost. And then it goes
Mm-hmm.
to, in the hospital, you see the doctor and they do the tests,
Mm-hmm.
their chest x-rays or blood tests. And then they also, work out the next steps. Nice. Now, when you're talking about PFA, I feel like we've deep dived into
No
this.
problem at all.
Whereas, I suppose for the viewers, the topic for today is about men in mental health. So I love that Dev is on board to talk more about that because it's very underrepresented, and yeah, statistics show that men do not, I suppose, voice out as much. So we're gonna go into that because that's the topic of today. But this is super interesting. So we might just finish up on that. Like with you
Sure.
mentioned PFA and someone
Mm-hmm.
noticing someone and offering PFA. Would you say this is someone that might have PFA skills, or are you, when you were talking about that, was it more specific to what Mental A.C.T do?
So PFA skills, right? In Singapore, it's quite prevalent. For example, we have organizations such as Red Cross that actually provides those kind of trainings and stuff. So one can actually go and learn PFA, all right, through this kind of bodies or organizations, and Mental Act also provides PFA training as well. All right, but it doesn't mean that if you do not have PFA training, you can't support someone in distress. All right, because if you deep dive into the necessary skills that PFA trainings actually talk about, right, it's often number one, being empathetic to the person, all right, not being sympathetic but rather being empathetic. Okay, putting yourself in the person's shoes, what they might have gone through, and empathizing with their feelings, getting connected to it. And secondly, being a listening ear. PFA's strongest point is all about listening to the person. So you ask questions that allow them to share a bit more about what they are experiencing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a narration of what they went through, okay? But the whole idea is for them to actually, let it all out. We have the, popular saying that, share your troubles, because the moment you share it, it becomes half, right? So likewise, PFA looks into, providing that listening ear so that they actually feel that they are heard and they can express whatever that they are feeling, or, however they are feeling, out aloud. So they are also able to hear their own thoughts, their own emotions, and they are also in a way processing it for themselves as well. Because if everything is in the head, it becomes very, muddy, it becomes very clouded, you don't know which one to react. You're in a very, very survival mode. But when someone is there and they're slowly talking to you and processing, listening to you, all right, it kind of allows you to also slow down and share what's going on in a logical manner or chronological manner, and that can support the person who's going through the distress. Mhm. So that is, the key points in PFA that allows it to be there, and you do not have to have the training necessary. But the training is important because it allows you to identify when someone is in distress. Because sometimes we think, okay, that person sitting down there using their phone, we do not know whether they are distressed or not. All right. It could be they are just simply there waiting for someone and using their phone. All right. But when you are trained in PFA, you get to understand, okay, look at the person's body posture. Is the person looking, sluggish? Is the person looking, tense? Look for, certain signs with regards to their mood. Are they fidgeting on the spot? Are they trying to peel their nails? Are they looking like they just cried? Their makeup is all over the place. Those kind of signs, right, which often without training we might actually overlook. PFA training allows you to become more sensitive to these signs and symptoms of distress. So by being sensitive to those things, when something happens and you are there at the area or at the spot, right, you're able to identify and provide immediate support for that person. Yeah.
Nice, nice. And I really appreciate that call out that someone doesn't necessarily have to be trained in PFA to help someone out.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually remember an incident when I was younger, so in my teenage years. I was just sitting, I think, at a bus stop, and someone had actually stopped and asked whether I was feeling okay. In that moment, I was. But the thought that someone and a complete stranger would stop and
Mm-hmm.
care enough to ask about me and
Mm-hmm.
be concerned for me, that left such an impression. So I can imagine if I was going through something, having that stranger, someone willing to be supportive and a listening ear
Mm-hmm.
would be very powerful. So yes,
Indeed.
I love what you do, and the message that you're sharing as well, that you someone can be there for someone, and it can be a
Mm-hmm.
complete stranger. Great. So, I
Definitely.
mean, for Mental Act, now I love that you guys kind of focus on the minority in Singapore. For those that are interested in reaching out to Mental Act, do they have to be of South Asian background? Do you yeah? Can anyone access and reach out to you guys for to learn more about PFA?
Definitely. In fact, our organization has an open door policy where, anyone, all right, staying in Singapore or are Singaporeans, PRs, okay, as long you are, in need of any kind of support, you can always reach out to Mental Act. See, our focus is on the Indian community or the South Asian community, but we are not exclusively for the South Asian community, because we feel that at any point of time, if someone wants to learn about mental health or someone requires support for mental health, accessibility and affordability should always be present for them to achieve it. Yeah. So anyone is welcome, everyone is welcome. In fact, we do have a good pool of volunteers who are actually non-Indians. You'd be quite surprised. I have, Chinese volunteers who do parenting workshops or support me in parenting workshops for the Indian community. So be it if you want to volunteer with us, every race is welcome. All right. At the same time, if you require any kind of support, you're more than welcome to actually, approach us.
Nice. You guys do amazing things at Mental Act. So please do, for our listeners, check out Mental Act and Dev. And I'll definitely share a link to via our social media. Great.
Thank
So
you.
going on to the topic of the actual topic of the day, men in mental health. Dev, can you share a little bit more why I suppose you think yeah that there is that issue and that rising issue.
Definitely. I think within the Singapore context, right, us Asian men, right, that means not just South Asian men, but in general, most of our Asian men or male counterparts, we hold very strong beliefs against mental health. Mhm. It could be something that came down through generations from our grandparents, from our parents, cultural nuances, cultural beliefs that the males in the family are supposed to be the ones that hold the fort or lead the family. All right. Even though we are like going heading towards the 22nd century. All right, we have technological advancements. We have things like feminism and everything up and going, there's still deeply rooted stigma associated with mental health. And more importantly, there is still that stigma about men being vulnerable. All right. And without that vulnerability, most men are unable to actually, share about their emotions or share about certain struggles that they are going through. And then they tend to actually keep all of it inside. Okay, either let's go with denial. We don't talk about it. We pretend it doesn't exist. We charge forward. As long we are hitting all the achievements, all the milestones, life is good. All right. Or some of us choose to bring it out in other ways. For example, anger is a very common thing. We explode. All right, and then we say, oh, okay, you know what? That's my way of expressing how my mental health is. All right. Or some of us just keep it inside, suffer in silence until sometimes it can be too late. And that's why probably you see, the number of suicides, male related suicides, all right, or the number of men who has passed on by suicides in Singapore is higher than the women, almost two times. Yeah. So there's a lot of stigma associated to, men and mental health, and especially, how men can be vulnerable about their emotions, about what they are going through, the struggles. Mhm.
Mm,
And if
mm,
we look at culture as one aspect, we also have the other aspect, which is the whole idea of toxic masculinity. Men are supposed to be this way. Men are supposed to not show their emotions. Men are supposed to, go headstrong. Men cannot talk about their problems. All right. Men should always keep things, going, making sure they hit everything. And if they don't, they are seen as a weakling. Sometimes, they are even called names, made to feel that, they are no longer a man or men enough. Mhm. So with this kind of, toxic masculinity traits, and then on top of that, you have culture coming in saying that, as an Asian, you have to, as Asian men, you have to actually behave in a certain manner. With all of this, layering on top the male identity, right? More often than not, you do see, us men finding it hard to actually share about their emotions or talk about their mental health. The stigma is
mm.
real. Hmm.
Yeah, that's tough because you guys are human. Men are human, and you guys have just as much
Hmm.
feeling and emotion and different ways, or yeah, just different ways of processing things. Dev, do you mind me asking, have you experienced your own mental health challenges, and how have you been able to overcome them, and how have you been able to overcome them if you have?
I think I had the privilege and the opportunity to see both sides. Where in my younger days, I did went through depression. I was not diagnosed, but I had the signs and symptoms for it. After my first breakup, things went downhill, and I chose to not seek help immediately because at that point of time, had to be man enough, right? Cannot go and talk to my guy friends and say, what, I feel down and everything, and I just kept it inside, internally. I tried talking to my family members and they said, what, just forget about it. You can find another girl and everything. But internally, I was going through a lot. It was not just about the loss of a loved one or a intimate partner, but it was also about my identity. Whether am I lovable? Am I a good person? Those kind of things. which I couldn't express out or even process it with anyone. And at that point of time when I was, just around 20, 21 years old, right? It's like, you don't know where to go and seek help, or you're not aware of the resources. Right? So what I did was I bottled it up. I bottled it up and I just kept it in all the way until when I was in the army. All right. My friend passed on by suicide. Mhm. And he was also another, male like myself, who was known in the community as being, the one that people approach, the one people, get inspired by. And his death, all right, his passing was too sudden for all of us. And then we realized actually he was also going through a lot of problems, a lot of issues, but he didn't share with anyone. And that was an eye opener for me because, you see, if he had shared, all right, or if any one of us was there, all right, to actually provide him with that support, all right, it doesn't have to be even PFA, just to be there to actually provide that support, right? Maybe he could still be alive. Mhm. And that hit me hard because after which, right, I fell more into my depressive state until when I was, going to get out of army. And then I asked myself, hey, am I going to live like that, keeping everything inside? So then I decided, okay, you know what? Let's go and find help. Mhm. And that's when, I reached out, I read a few self-help books, and after that I found out, there's such thing called counselors, there's such thing called social workers, family service centers, agencies, organizations that actually cater to mental health. And I said, you know what, maybe it's time I start going for therapy. So I started therapy briefly, felt okay, it was good, went well. All right. After I felt that, I can move forward without the need of therapy, I went forward, and eventually, when things got hard, as years gone by, all right, I also then stepped into therapy more frequently. All right. But just short phases, because I realized that, hey, if I don't talk about my problems, I'm going to keep it bottled up. It's not going to help me. It's not going to help the people around me. Mhm. And being an advocate for mental health, right? If I don't walk the talk, then how about other men around me within my community or even family members take the plunge to actually seek help? So I became that advocate, and I also chose to be vulnerable, right? So that other men can actually see, hey, it's actually manly to be vulnerable. Yeah,
Nice, nice. And the idea that you can't help others until you help yourself. I like that.
definitely.
It's mainly to be
Mhm.
yeah. That's thank you for sharing that. And I think emotions and showing vulnerability and showing weakness for anybody of any gender is can
Mhm.
be tough, especially with stigma, let alone, the men, because with all of that you've mentioned, race, gender stereotypes, that whole, power in men, it's so I can understand that that's very tough. So can you share a little bit more for the men that might be watching this podcast, or just men in general, how they can seek help, or how they can take those steps to open up a little bit more, or if, if it's their counterpart that's watching this, how can they help the men in their life, whether it be their dad, their brother, their partner, their friends, how can they help?
I think if you look at the first part, how they can help themselves, right? Right now, with all the technological advancements, we have AI assisted apps that they can actually, talk to you about mental health. We have, things like even, our organization that can actually provide, everything okay?
I was going to
Okay.
mention Zoala as well.
Yes,
But
I
yes.
was going to mention that as well. So even organizations like Mental A.C.T, Zola, we all exist, and the beautiful thing is you might not need to even share your face. Because
Mm.
often men feel that, okay, if I need to share my identity, right, okay, will that then backfire on me? But now with the presence of apps that can actually provide you with the support, you don't even need to share, your face to your counselor or your social worker whatsoever. You can still have an anonymous counseling session, and that's very beautiful because it allows you to be fully vulnerable without worrying about, your identity. All right. In with men, right, we always have to have that tough, facade in front of us, right? We don't want to lose it. that's fine. But if you know that you're going through something and you need to process it, choose this kind of anonymous, platforms that are available. Right? I think there's also family service centers. Okay, and that is within usually 2 to 3 km from your house. All right, you can go on to the FSC e-locator on MSF website, and they provide pro bono services. Okay, but they do not provide extensive counseling support. So it can be a touch point to go and get a bit of assessment and then get them to refer you to counseling agencies or any other alternative ways. Mhm. And if you feel that, okay, I don't want to go down to the FSC, I don't want to use any apps or anything like that. For starters, all right, you can actually start talking to people within your community who are trained in mental health first aid. Because they are able to recognize the signs and symptoms of the mental health distress. They can also signpost you to the necessary support, that you might feel beneficial, or you might feel more, appropriate for yourself as well. All right. So there are sufficient resources that you can go to without having to worry about what's going to happen if anybody finds out that I'm going to seek help. Okay. The second thing you can also do is to start these conversations within your groups of men. See, if we don't start these conversations within groups of men, right, eventually we are all going to, secretly go for therapy, and that's not going to work in the long run, right? We want to create the ecosystem or that systemic change where men can talk about their problems with one another, all right, without judgment, all right, and everyone can actually provide a safe space for that person, that man, to actually talk about their emotions. Because the more you talk about your emotions, the more you process it, the less likelihood for you to actually develop mental illnesses that actually require then counseling, those kind of intervention. So let's nip it at the bud. If you can start talking about your problems, start talking about your emotions, process it, let it out, there's a lesser need for you to seek professional help. Okay? So that is for men trying to seek help for themselves and also within their community. Then let's look at the other side. Family members, spouses, partners, how can they support? I think the first step is to be, confident in approaching them to talk about their mental health, right? Because often what we do observe in our counseling sessions, right, is that the spouses, right, tend to hesitate to talk to their men about, what they are going through because they are afraid that, there might be a backlash. All right. I'll be very honest. We Asian men often backlash, or a sarcastic remark or an angry remark might be the first, way of them responding when someone approaches them with regards to their mental health. We can't blame them much because that's how our society has, built men and about their masculinity. What I'll suggest is being confident enough to actually, ask them again, even after, all right, they have actually spoken to you in that manner. And this time, when you're approaching them, share your observations in terms of how their behavior was, how their mood and their emotions have been, all right? And if you notice any cognitive related issues, like, you see them, spaced out, not able to remember things, those kind of things, all right? Share with them the observations and you can categorize it for them in this way and ask them, all right, have they noticed these things? Because if they have not noticed these things, but when you're sharing to them, they start realizing it. That can slowly be an opener for you to actually talk more about their mental health or their state of mental health, right? So having the confidence to try again, okay? Because sometimes the first time might not cut it, okay? Second thing is going to them without the need to actually, blame them for certain behaviors, right? Because once we are going in with a blaming stance, right, it becomes very judgmental, okay? And you might then realize that the person becomes even more closed, all right, even more guarded, and that's going to impact their mental health even more because then the more guarded they are, the less likelihood that they're actually going to find help or be even open to seeking help. All right. So not going in with a blaming stance, but going in with the point of view that, hey, I'm there for you. I notice certain things and I'm concerned about your mental health, and I know that, you might require certain help. All right. So number one is going with a confidence. All right. Trying again if the first time doesn't succeed. Number two, all right, going in with non-judgmental attitude or a non-judgmental point of view. Okay. Third is, if really you cannot go, you try multiple times, you go in with non-judgmental, doesn't seem to work, approach friends or family members who are males that this person looks up to, all right, or has a very strong connection with, and try and see whether can they talk to this person with regards to their mental health. All right. Reason being because based on observations, right, when older men come and talk to a younger man about their mental health, or if it's close friends that come and talk to them about their mental health, men surprisingly are okay in terms of talking to them about their mental health issues, because it becomes like men talk, all right, talk about what we are going through and everything, and it might be a bit more easier for them to find a sense of connection, find that they can relate to one another, because their point of view and how they see certain life challenges might be similar in nature, right? So a third suggestion will be getting someone, all right, who's another male, someone they look up to or they have a strong connection with, to actually be the person talking to them. Right? If that too fails, okay, so this is the last tool in the toolbox. Sometimes being vulnerable about your own mental health could be the key for them to open up. So, for instance, all right, I've had spouses coming in for couple counseling, and they will be like, you know what? I keep asking my husband, why are you not opening up? Why are you not opening up? Why you don't want to talk about mental health? And I tried your methods really, Devan. I pointed out to him, this is what he's doing, this is how he's being, behaving at home, how he talks to the kids and everything. And I asked the spouse only one thing: have you been vulnerable towards him in sharing about your experience about how his mental health has been affecting you? And more often than not, they said, "Hey, I didn't look at that point of view." I said, you see, if it takes one's vulnerability to share, and in turn, when someone sees that vulnerability coming from you, they might be more willing to share, what they are going through as well. So if all things fail and you really want to try and nudge them, maybe sharing about your own experience, your own struggles, and sometimes even what you are going through in relation to what's happening or how they are behaving could be actually beneficial. Yeah. I hope those tips can help. And really, if everything fails, sometimes it's all about getting in a mental health professional to come in and address it directly.
Nice. Thanks, Dev. That's yeah, I think super super helpful and some really great tips. I love the to start off with, be that change within your group. So be that person to be vulnerable and encourage, especially if you're men in your own in your own friendship groups, be that change. Nice. And pick, yeah, especially I think if they're not someone that is going through something, but they're
Mm-hmm,
able to be vulnerable, that helps open up for those that might be struggling to then share.
mm-hmm,
So yeah, some really great points that you've brought up, Dev. I love it. It's and I also something you talked about just now about how they approach someone that they're concerned for. I think kind of something that came top of mind is communication skills. Something that I've noticed in my own relationship. Sometimes it's not about just having PFA skills is very important.
mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
I think first and foremost, having that communication skill to
mm-hmm.
first of all not feel like you're attacking someone when you're trying to help
Yeah.
them, but it's
Mm-hmm.
changing certain phrases or the way you approach and the words you use that can be super impactful.
Definitely.
Nice. Thanks, Dev. We explored some really, really great things, and I think there's a lot more that we could go into. So I think definitely, if you're open to and you have the time to come back on another episode of ours, we would absolutely love it. But I suppose to
Oh,
to, to
love.
finish,
Mm-hmm,
we'd love to have you. But I suppose to wrap up, for those that are watching and our listeners, how what are the best ways, the easiest ways that they can reach out to Mental ACT and to you for support, or if they're interested in volunteering?
I think with regards to approaching mental act, you can always go onto our website, all right, and fill up the inquiry form if you require any kind of support. You can also DM us on our social media platforms as well, and then our staff or our volunteers will actually attend to you. And that's one of the ways that you can actually seek help. If let's say you are feeling suicidal, all right, and you require immediate help, okay, and sometimes calling some of the hotlines might not be that useful for you, or you might feel that I don't know whether or not will I benefit, right? You can also call us directly, all right. You can also call this number 9619 3531, right? Where there's always someone who can actually speak to you and hold that space for you to see whether or not you require more help, right? I think I'll leave with these parting words that for men to seek help, right, it needs not just men themselves to change. We need a systemic change where more communities are open to talking about men's and mental health, and also creating that safe space for them to approach, to seek help and not be ridiculed, not be judged, and also not, be taken to task, or being used against, because sometimes men are afraid that, if I be vulnerable, will it be used against me? Mhm. So creating that non-judgmental, non-accusatory space is very important. I think it's wonderful that we have this kind of podcast going for starters, right? And I definitely hope that we can do more to support the men and their mental health.
Nice. Thanks, Dev. And just a reminder, like one of the great advice that you mentioned is use apps. Everyone has access to their phone. There are a lot of
Yes, use
apps
Zola.
that you yes. But really, at the end of the day, whatever works for you, yes, to
Mhm.
be able to be open. And I love the fact that you can be anonymous. So if you are someone that are struggling, use those apps. That's the first step, and then hopefully that I hear a lot of stories as well, talking to other men in mental health, that first step is always the hardest, and anonymity is a great way to start, and that gives them the courage, gives them the understanding that actually it's okay to talk about it, and then they can go
Mhm.
forth and speak to people in person and other groups and forums. So
Definitely.
great call outs. Thank you, Dev. And yes, I suppose to quickly wrap up, thank you for joining us in this podcast about men and mental health. We talked about a lot of great things. I'll share them below in our description box. Let us know, reach out to us on social media, in a comment section, LinkedIn. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, what you want to hear more of in our future episodes, and we'll continue bringing on awesome people like Dev here. We'll bring him back to talk more about mental health. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much for your time,
Christina.
Dev. You're amazing.
Take care.
Thank you for your work. See you.
Thank you.